The number of people on this planet is growing so fast it may reach 11 billion by the end of the century. Half of this growth will come from Africa, powered by Nigeria, which is already home to 170 million people. But is this population boom a blessing or a burden?
This year's World Population Day message has Africa firmly in its sights. For the continent's population is rising so fast, the UN warns it's becoming unsustainable, particularly in Nigeria. Africa's most populous country is now home to nearly 170 million people and still growing by an extraordinary 3% a year. Some say the increase is outstripping the ability of government to provide not just basics like food and shelter, but also jobs and infrastructure. But the family planning issue is hugely controversial, especially in the poor and often suspicious Muslim North. So what exactly is Nigeria to do?
Yes, that's a question we're going to try and answer in this programme. Hello, I'm Henry Bonsu and this is Africa Today. Talk to many Nigerians and they'll say our biggest problem is that there's just too many of us. We haven't got the houses, the schools, the jobs, the infrastructure. We import too much and produce too little. Others say it's not the population that's the problem, but the management of resources. After all, other countries have much higher population densities and they're coping fine. With me are Nigerian business and resources consultant Grace Alalade, Roger Martin from the lobby group Population Matters, and on the line from Abuja, Nigeria is John Adebite, the executive director of the Planned Parenthood Federation of Nigeria. Welcome to all of you.
Thank you.
Let me put that to you first of all, Grace, as a Nigerian woman. When the UN Secretary General talks about empowering women and girls, because of course if they're educated, if they go on to university, they delay the onset of parenthood, they have fewer children. That's what Nigeria should be concentrating on. That's what the world should be concentrating on. What do you say?
I don't think it's a practical thing to actually put out there, because you've got to remember that this is something that we're very proud of in the culture. So the Nigerian culture, for example, historically says that a woman's role is to produce.
Yes.
And she's got that pressure placed upon her. And then in the Yoruba culture, for example, where I'm from, we say that a woman shows how blessed she is if she's able to produce. So you've got that mindset going on in the background, especially the pressure on having and producing a male heir.
Well,
so
that
with
might
that
be
in the
case,
background,
you know, as far as tradition is concerned, it sounds very nice, very bucolic. However, when it comes to 21st century Nigeria, when you have a birth rate of 3 or so percent a year, that's about 5 million people now. I mean, that's surely unsustainable. I mean, it requires, doesn't it, a change of mindset? Or do you think, no, it's still a boon?
No, it definitely requires a change of mindset, because obviously alongside of this issue about the increasing population, we also have sexual diseases. So we've got things like HIV. So really going back to the mindset is something that needs to be changed. But that can only be changed if you identify the leaders, if you identify the influencers, so the people who are in the villages, the statesmen, the ones who are, you know, they're in charge of their clans.
The people with influence.
Yes, they are the ones who need to first of all be educated, because it's then that they will spread the message.
But you feel by and large it's a boon to have this massive, mighty Nigerian population of 170 million and rising. Let me put that to, I'm going to put that to John Adebite, who's on the line from Abuja. And you, in your role as Executive Director of the Planned Parenthood Federation of Nigeria, say what in response to Ban Ki-moon's message on World Population Day? And what do you say to Grace's notion that this is traditionally a blessing, a large family, a mighty Nigerian population? I think we might have lost John again, so I'm going to refer... You're there. Okay, so John, how did Ban Ki-moon's message go down in Nigeria?
I want to appreciate this opportunity given to Planned Parenthood Federation of Nigeria to be part of this program. I think it rekindled where PPFN started about 49 years ago. The issue of adolescent pregnancies was one of the issues that brought PPFN to fore. And that this problem is still with us today indicates how huge these problems are. And the message from Ban Ki-moon is tremendously going to support the work that we do here, particularly among the adolescents. Talking about whether the 170 million people in Nigeria is an asset or a liability must be seen against the background of what is the population group factoring on development in Nigeria. As this population group, particularly the huge, about 42% of the population bring from the spectrum of adolescents, is it having value now, or will it have value to development in the future?
And what is your answer to that, John? I mean, I get the impression you're saying that that's a problem.
Our answer to that now, if you look with the insight of what is happening contemporarily now, I think we definitely are not very comfortable about population management currently and the effort being made now. We believe that the country must, as a matter of priority, all right, re-strategize its population management strategy.
And what does that mean in practice, John? John, what does that mean in practice? Because when people hear of Planned Parenthood, they think of contraception, they think of family management, and in some parts of rural Africa, not just rural, also mainstream thinking, they say, oh, it's about contraception, it's about sexual education of children in school, and they say, no way, that's Western, it's not for us.
Really, I think we have to look at what is at work in other climes and what is possibly to be able to going to work in our country. Yes, Nigeria is one of the developing countries, but when you look at the statistics, it is way, way, way down. And I think both the policymakers and the public commentators are not very comfortable about the way things are going in this country, because basically we are seeing the lyrics and the features that this problem. Currently, there's a huge unemployment among youth. Most of the infrastructural situation are decaying. We know also that more children are out of school than the ones that are here. These are things pointers that are showing that we know we cannot go a long way of China and India, where hitherto they have a situation of population control. But basically, within the context of rights-based programming, we must begin to do the right thing. And the right
okay, well, John, Roger in the studio is nodding vigorously to what you're saying. Why are you in such total agreement? Well, it's pretty obvious. You think that this world population growth, I mean, globally is a problem, but in some developing countries is critical.
Absolutely critical. And I'm sure President Jonathan is right to be very worried about this, because if you project 3% per year till the end of the century, the lifetime of a child born today perhaps, you get to well over 1 billion Nigerians, which definitely isn't going to happen. Mm-hmm. So the population will stop growing at some point, as will all populations. The question is when and how, and the choices are the same. Sooner by humane means, by well-designed policies, women's empowerment, family planning, and a lot of other intelligent programs besides, or later by more deaths through famine, disease and conflict.
Well, yeah, because a lot of the things that you mentioned, and of course Johnson mentioned, have worked in the, quote, developed world, in the industrialized world, because of course pretty much everyone gets educated to the age of 16, it delays the onset of child rearing, life is expensive, it's a capitalist economy, and so things calm down. But in many of these other countries, life, well, can be nasty, brutish and short. And it's very, very difficult to transplant what's worked here in the industrialized Western part of the world with what's happening elsewhere. I mean, how do you try to work with local factors?
Well, Niger, for instance, have had a lot of success with their new pilot, where they don't just send the family planning clinics round the villages to get the 3-month depot jab for those women that want it, but they also engage the husbands in husbands' schools. They explain to the husbands how much healthier all their children would be, how much better off the family would be generally, with if their wife was only pregnant once every 3 years rather than every year. This is not a difficult message. The Niger people have had a breakthrough quite recently, last year, with it. I think the other thing to get across to people is the big picture without talking about coercion. I think President Jonathan made a bad mistake last year when he
did float the idea of going down the Chinese road.
The idea of Chinese road. And only China and Vietnam, two East Asian communist countries, are able to enforce that. It wouldn't work in Africa.
Yes.
It was wrong to suggest it. And he ought to take the religious people into his confidence early on, along with the village chiefs, as Grace said. Get the leadership to understand that reducing fertility is the solution to colossal problems bearing down on the
but in many of these countries, particularly across the continent of Africa, people are very religious. You know, they believe in traditional religions, they believe in Christianity, in Islam, and fertility is given from God. Yeah.
Yes.
So if you interfere with that, then you're going against the will of God. How do you tackle that?
I want to ask Grace really, because it's extremely difficult. But I do know that in terms of resource depletion, for instance, in the conflicts taking place now in the middle of Nigeria, between rapidly growing numbers of herdsmen in the north and farmers in the south, competing ever more violently over ever shrinking resources of food, water, soil, and vegetation. I mean, there is a picture of what they are doomed to suffer indefinitely while the desert moves south and the herds with it. It's a terrible tragedy looming across the whole Sahel, and I think somehow or other, local people with the techniques to do it have to get this message across. It's a matter of survival rather than choice.
Let me go back to you, John, in Abuja. When the president makes comments like the one he did last year about maybe restricting by force the number of children per family or per woman, how do people respond? And do they have a sense of urgency? Because that's one of the things that's difficult to gauge. How critical do people see this being in Nigeria?
I think the statement which the president made, like you said, all right, he has been briefed, or he has his feelings from the hugeness of the problem concerning population. But I think what development partners, our own impression about it is that I think the world, and Nigeria in particular, all right, should not go the way which other countries have gone in terms of population control. Internally, yeah, people responded into it because permanently people see population control as a Western-induced program. I think family planning, either natural or tradition, has been with us for centuries in Africa, particularly among our people here. So I think, quite honestly, family planning is still the best way to go in addressing the issues that have to do with population growth. For instance, in 1998, when the first population policy was enacted, it was tagged 4 children per woman. And what that policy direction was trying to probably put in the mind of people is that by the time every woman has 4 children, we are talking about reducing them from 2.8 to 2%. And for a very young an economy that is developmental in nature, having a 2.0% population growth will be comfortable for growth. I think most of the people who have been talking about issue of Nigerian population, whether it's too huge for development or not, they are talking against the background of first, these 3.2 will leave factor into development. If it's not going to support, for a lot of argument has been for this. And one argument is that they're looking at the age structure, which is now a very young population, transiting and become a dividend for growth in the future.
Well, this is it, because of course a young population, a dynamic population, a population that wants to work, these are the kinds of things that have helped some parts of the world, some countries, really leapfrog some of the other stages that the Western industrialized countries had to go through. John, for the moment, thank you very much indeed. Lots of comments have been coming into the Facebook page this week. Let's take a look at a few of them. And we'll start off with this one from Obe Agbetu, who says, I can only foresee this problem getting worse. Despite the rampant Africa Rising mantra, whole segments of Nigerian society remain uneducated or for religious reasons will not entertain the notion of family planning or contraception. We have this from Umaru Suleiman Nari. Umaru says, the population explosion is not peculiar to Nigeria or the African continent alone, but it's a global phenomenon. The best way to address this issue is by investing in strategic development planning, better infrastructure and partnerships with developed nations in all sectors of the economy. This will make for a more productive labour force. And finally, Peter King Otto says, Nigeria's massive population could be a positive, but only if and when they have people in power who know how to harness that potential. You have to put education at the top of the agenda. A large educated population is not a burden, but a blessing. And if you'd like to have your voice heard, here's how you can get in touch.
Keep your thoughts coming in. Email africa@presstv.co.uk or text us on +44 78 00 00 8086. Or you can go to our Facebook fan page, Africa Today, Press TV London. Or you can now follow us on Twitter. We are at Africa Today TV.
Okay, let's get a brief response to one or two of those Facebook posts. Grace, you nodded and you grunted briefly in approval at what Peter King Otto said. A large educated population is not a burden but a blessing. Discuss.
Well, I think something that the UN report said is that even if women reduce the number of children, we are still going to see an increase in population.
Yeah.
So really, having an education program in place, yes, is very key, but I would take that further and look at the work that someone like Professor Jeffrey Sachs did on reverse migration. He said that there is going to be an increased population coming from the Western world because of the opportunities that they see in countries like Nigeria and South Africa.
Yep.
So we must look at building those strategic partnerships with developing countries and also putting in place an educational program that we can talk to with the chiefs, who are the ones, for example, that are going to be most successful in implementing any program around family planning. But I would say that it's not just about internal growth. There is also going to be growth coming from outside.
Well, I mean, you've got about 20 or so million Nigerians in the diaspora who
Exactly.
might come and swell that population to 200 million in 5 years if Nigeria's economic boom follows the population boom.
Absolutely.
Isn't that a frightening prospect? Even though these people might be gifted, talented with money?
I don't think it's a frightening prospect. I think it's a great opportunity in terms of using their brains, their intellect, to come and do something about the issues that we have in Nigeria. We always would like to see those who have left the country coming back into the country, like myself, to actually help with the infrastructure, help with the resources,
Well, when you say help with the
ways.
infrastructure, I mean, you know, we talk about infrastructure here in the so-called developed world. So in the UK at the moment, the big discussions about shortage of housing, shortage of road space, shortage of high-speed railways. What does Nigeria need? When you go to Lagos, Abuja, you go to Kaduna, any of these places, what do you see? Is the need obvious?
Very, very obvious. If you take a look at our roads, we need maintenance is a big issue. We need help with maintenance. So the roads get built, but there's no one really thinking about the maintenance of
Millions
those.
and millions of drivers.
Absolutely. And you know, that is an issue as well, and that's going to increase in the future. So we need stronger infrastructure in place, especially where we are looking at maintaining the infrastructure, maintaining our bridges, roads, systems, so to ensure that we can cope with the rising population.
Let me bring Roger back into this. Roger, I'm just looking at the league table in terms of population of all the countries in the world, and of course it's headed up by China, 1.3 billion, India, 1.2, then the USA, nearly 310 million. Nigeria is at number 7 with 170 or so million. But when it comes to population density, Nigeria falls to just above halfway through. And then, of course, there are countries like this one, for example, Great Britain, or UK, far more dense as far as population per square kilometre. And when you look at the rest of Africa, many of those countries appear underpopulated when you compare them to other countries with similar landmass. So, Sudan, Zambia, Somalia, Congo, Mali, Gabon, Chad. Africa isn't Nigeria. Nigeria isn't Africa. There's much of Africa that could do with more population and more infrastructure.
Well, first of all, the biophysics are very different between Gabon and Nigeria. A lot of Nigeria is desert, and the Sahel countries are all desert. The people who calculate this are the Global Footprint Network, who are the only scientists working on it. And according to them, we in the West are grossly overshot ecologically. With Britain is 3/4 overshot. Our sustainable natural income every year will only support about 1/4 of us. So, it's not preaching to others. We're in terrible trouble. Far too many Brits.
Well, at the moment, Britain's okay. I'll leave that we complain about austerity.
For the moment, but if you're interested in long-term sustainability, which I am, I want a planet that my granddaughter can live in, and a country that she can live in. Well, we aren't there yet. We've got a very huge amount of reduction in numbers and consumption to get sustainable.
Aren't these African countries that we've been talking about paying the price for the overconsumption and the increase, the uber population density that we've seen in Western countries? Because when you look at them, whether you're talking about Germany, 229 people per kilometre square, Nigeria, just 171, Brazil, just 22.
Yeah. Brazil is not overshot, Nigeria is, and Britain far more so. All the OECD countries are overshot, really, apart from Canada, Russia, Australia, New Zealand, one or two others. But basically, there are too many rich people, and of course the damage they each do as they come onto swell the numbers is far greater than individually than the damage done by an extra Nigerian. Having said which, Nigeria's population growth rate going to 1 billion at current rates this century in one lifetime is clearly impossible and unsustainable. When 1/3 of the people are hungry already and half of them are in poverty, unemployment is massive. Clearly, if you could just stop running to stand still,
that
you
would
could go
be
somewhere better. But for the time
right.
being, the education minister has to spend all his budget simply building more second-rate primary schools.
In a word, John Adegbite, what do you think is going to happen? You're working hard with your Planned Parenthood Federation, but you need other people to come together. What do you see happening, briefly, if you will?
Things are becoming better this part of the world, particularly with the coming in of the present administration. A concerted effort has been made towards funding of family planning program. Prior to, in 2009, the government, for the first time, made a budget line item for family planning commodity to the tune of $3 million. Mm-hmm. And during the London summit, the government made additional $11.3 million commitment towards family planning.
So do you believe they're on the right track? We're going to have to end it there then,
yes,
John. Thank you very much indeed for joining us today from Abuja in Nigeria. And that rounds up today's programme. Thanks to all those of you who've sent in comments to us. Email africa@presstv.co.uk or text us to +44 7800 008086. And don't forget, you can now follow us on Twitter @Africa Today TV. Many thanks to our guests, Grace Alalade, Roger Martin and John Adegbite. Join us next week for another edition of Africa Today. Till then, it's goodbye from me, and on behalf of the whole team, thanks again for watching.